So I was a major? The old man asked, nodding as the title sunk in. Monte Cristo sat across from him with narrowed eyes, drink in hand. Yes, you were. The old man smiled. Well, of course he was a major. Travel made him tired and fatigue made him forgetful. But the Cavalcanti name was a famous one. It descended from a line of kings in Italy. Virgil had even written about it. Dante. You mean Dante? Monte Cristo asked, waiting. The man smiled again. Yeah, of course, Dante. It's the Inferno. Monte Cristo stood and paced the room. And the old man's visit today wasn't his own idea, was it? Major Cavalcanti silently shook his head. So you were sent here by someone else then? Major Cavalcanti nodded with a grin. When it became clear the old man wasn't going to take the hint, Monte Cristo cleared his throat. He'd said it was Father Busoni, correct? The Italian priest? And he gave you a letter? He prompted. Major Cavalcanti snapped his fingers as he remembered and quickly pulled a letter from his coat. That was right. He'd forgotten about that too. Monte Cristo glanced over the letter and remarked that it was all explained here. Major Cavalcanti had a son who had been kidnapped at a young age. The boy was born out of wedlock, but Cavalcanti had later married the mother, making the boy's claim legitimate. The young lad had actually been kidnapped by his own tutor in an attempt to ransom part of the major's notable income of over $500,000 a year. Wow, that's an elaborate plan, Major Cavalcanti cooed, staring absent-mindedly in the corner. Monte Cristo ignored him and asked if he had the marriage certificate and the birth certificate with him for his son, Andrea Cavalcanti. Turning slowly, the major shook his head. He must have forgotten them back in Italy. Was that important? Monte Cristo facepalmed. Yes. Luckily, Father Busoni was a thorough man and included a certified copy in his correspondences. Anyway, the Count had found Andrea. That's awesome, exclaimed the major, taking a large bite of the biscuit one of the servants had just brought in. And who's that? Your son? Your long-lost son who you've been looking for years? He's in the other room. Monte Cristo's patience was running thin. The old man donned a smile and said he couldn't wait. And so the Count opened the door and entered, introducing himself as the Count of Monte Cristo. Andrea Cavalcanti sat on a couch and introduced himself as such, highlighting his ancient Italian line. His name was mentioned by Dante, did you know? He'd been kidnapped by his tutors at a young age and only recently escaped. Now he wanted to find his father and marry a beautiful Parisian woman. Monte Cristo took a deep breath. What a thorough introduction. Anyway, he was elated to direct Andrea's attention to his father, who had also been searching for him for 15 years. Andrea forced a smile and held out his hand. Oh yeah! Hey, Dad! The major shook his son's hand, and Monte Cristo announced that he would give them some time alone to catch up. He quickly shut the door, his footsteps retreating down a long hallway. Yeah, so I have no idea what's going on, Andrea confessed now that they were alone. Son, what are you talking about? The major returned, clearly feeling awkward. Andrea grimaced. Come on. The old man knew they weren't really father and son, right? The major shrugged. Andrea said his letter had come from someone called Lord Wilmore, telling him to show up at this address and say he was the son of Major Cavalcanti. There'd been a whole page of backstory, too. And if he went through with it, there was a $50,000 per year income for him. The major dropped his act, too, sharing that his letter had come from someone named Father Busoni for $50,000 up front and more to come if he did well. Well, what do you say, Dad? Andrea said with a smile. Wait, we just talked about how I'm not your real dad. You do know that, right? The major replied. Andrea groaned. Yes, they were going to make this money. They just had to be careful not to slip up. I mean, maybe, the major replied. I screwed up like a half a dozen times in there with this Monte Carlo guy, and he didn't even notice. I think we're good. Honestly, he seems like kind of an idiot. So, you think he's the mark? Andrea asked. The major laughed. He didn't know who the mark was, but he could tell his fake son one thing. It wasn't them. I'm Jason Weiser. From Bardic, this is Fictional. What had been thin was now frail. What had been pale was now yellow. And what had been opportunistic was now evil. Edmund remembered the first and last meeting he'd had with Villefort, all those years ago. The whole encounter had immediately followed his wedding. He had been arrested and dragged before the young attorney. Villefort had smiled, assuring him that everything would be okay, as he burned the evidence implicating his father. Then he'd sent Edmund off to prison and taken away the young groom's name. Edmund sat and thought. Danglars was an opportunist. Mondego was a coward. But Villefort? Villefort knew the right thing to do. It was his job to administer justice. And yet he condemned a boy to death in the darkest cells of Chateau d'If simply because his existence would have made his rise to power slightly more difficult. And what had Villefort done with all of his power? The guy was a shut-in. He had been stabbed years ago, and now he hardly ever went out. He threw exactly one ball a year and appeared for 15 minutes, a quarter of the time the king appeared at any of the balls he hosted. He would, by far, be the most difficult one to trap. Edmund knew Danglars and Mondego. He knew their weaknesses, the exact levers to pull to draw them out. Villefort, however, was an enigma, though not impossible. An evil man never commits just one vile act. He left a trail, and even though Villefort tried to bury his past, he had a long trail to cover. Just a couple days ago, Edmund's plans had been set in motion. All it took was his servant, Ali, standing in the street, staring down the alarmed and charging horses of Madame de Villefort's carriage. One well-placed lasso later, and the horses were again calm. Everything had gone according to plan, and Monte Cristo looked every bit the horse-stopping hero he intended, except they hadn't anticipated the boy, little Edward, fainting. Monte Cristo dragged the kid inside, popped open a leather satchel full of vials, and administered one drop to the boy. When he looked up, he realized the mother's, Madame de Villefort's, attention wasn't on her son gasping back to consciousness, but on Monte Cristo's poisons and potions. With a straight face, the Count tucked away that bit of information for another time. Now, not only had he managed a visit from the grateful Villefort, the king's attorney, but Villefort was coming to his party. He just didn't know that it was in Monte Cristo's country house, the same place he had lost a son and nearly lost his life. But there was more. Villefort was so grateful that he insisted Monte Cristo come visit Madame de Villefort, his wife, and young Edward, who wanted to thank him, again, for saving them in the street the other day. It was truly a miracle that Monte Cristo and Ali were there with such perfect timing. And so, the next evening, Monte Cristo strode up to the house of Madame and Monsieur de Villefort. He saw their oldest, a girl by the name of Valentine, returning from the garden at a strangely late hour. And Monte Cristo stored that away for later, too. Tonight, he needed to have all of his wits about him. He recalled seeing Madame de Villefort stairs the other day. She had been looking at his poisons, and Monte Cristo was ready. Inside, Madame de Villefort hugged and kissed little Edward, and ushered the little monster from the room before turning to her guest for a very civilized discussion of deadly poisons. It had always been a macabre interest of hers, and Monte Cristo was obviously very accomplished. The Count smiled. He had been all over the world and learned something about poisons. They didn't exist. One person's poison was another's medicine. For instance, that draught he gave little Edward the other day to wake him up from his faint. If he had given Edward more than 2 drops of it, he would now be comatose. More than 5, he would be dead. Even something like arsenic could have its uses. Monte Cristo had heard of men in the East building up a suit of armor out of poisons, taking a little bit more each day and slowly immunizing their body so that, if the time came and they were ever really poisoned, they would be able to withstand it. Madame de Villefort replied that the draught to wake someone from a faint was very useful, and she would very much like to learn how to make it. Monte Cristo nodded slightly. He'd be happy to teach her. But, in the meantime, here, she could have his bottle. He held out a small bottle of the red potion. Remember, he cautioned, 1 drop, a max of 2. Any more risked doing permanent harm. Madame de Villefort thanked him profusely and begged him to stay for dinner. Monte Cristo made a slight bow. He wished he could, but he actually had a date. He reminded her of his party at his country estate and made his way toward the opera house. Haydée was stunned by the opera hall. She had grown up as a princess, and yet she had never seen anything so big, so magnificent. Monte Cristo had said they would be going out, and at first she was reluctant. She hadn't been exposed to this many people at once since... She shuddered. That was in the past. She was with Monte Cristo now, and she was safe. By now, Haiti was used to all the looks, the stares. It was either because she was some foreign princess, loaded down with so many diamonds that she had a hard time lifting her head, or because of Monte Cristo, who, in a week, had given away 2 priceless horses, saved the lives of a noblewoman and her child, and I guess entered a horse named Vampa in the races and won. Haiti wasn't stupid. She knew the man she was with had secrets. He had some plan, some reason for everything he did. He had a darkness inside of him, but he was also kind and good. Whatever darkness lived within him had saved her from the darkness of slavery and, worse. And that was enough. She would stay with him forever. Yes, he had bought her, but it was never like that. He had never laid a hand on her. When she realized that Monte Cristo was different from the men who had bought her mother, she rejoiced. She loved him like a father. Then, as they grew closer, she loved him in a different way. Monte Cristo, however, didn't reciprocate. At this point, after whatever happened to him in the past, Haiti wasn't sure that he could love again. Someone had hurt him. To Haiti, it didn't matter that he couldn't love her in return. Together, they had traveled the world, and he treated her like a princess. And so, she had almost laughed at him the other night, when he knocked on the door announcing that she was free. Haiti knew, but Monte Cristo clarified. She was legally no longer his slave, and she had every right to leave if she wanted. Haiti grimaced as he talked about her meeting young men and finding love. She said she had already found it. Monte Cristo smiled a sad smile. She was just in her early 20s. He was 45. In 10 years, she would still be in the flower of her youth, and he would be an old man. She had hugged him then, saying that without him, she never would have gotten those 10 years at all. And so now, here she was, listening to an opera on the other side of the world, and she was the talk of the city. She didn't understand the words of the show, but Monte Cristo assured her that no one did. It was an opera. You simply sat there and tried not to fall asleep. Still, Haiti loved it, and barely noticed when Monte Cristo left their box to go mingle. She glanced around a couple of times, saw him with this countess, this baron, that man. Suddenly, Haiti was 5 years old, back in that cave, and watching between the slats of wood as the man sauntered in and shoved her father to his knees. Haiti and her mother had screamed, but no one heard them over the gunshots. That man. He was less of a boy now. His hair was turning gray, and he had a stark black mustache, but Haiti would never forget that face. That man was there in Paris, and he was talking to Monte Cristo. When Monte Cristo finished talking to the man, he heard it. Gasps from his box, and looked to see Ali rushing forward to catch Haiti as she fainted. When Haiti awoke, they were back in Monte Cristo's carriage. Groggily, she opened her eyes. Barely audible over the rumble of the carriage, she spoke. She had seen him. She had seen the man who murdered her father. Villefort stood over Nordier, his father. They had some time alone together before the others came in. Nordier had called them all together, even though the only way he could speak now was with his eyes. A few years earlier, Nordier had collapsed. Doctors declared it was a stroke, but the man remained powerful even into his late 60s. He was the one man in all of Paris that Villefort truly feared. He had survived revolutions, yet never gave up his principles. Then, in a second, God changed it all, bringing Nordier within Villefort's power. The only people left who could understand the man were Villefort, Valentine, Villefort's daughter from his first marriage, and Nordier's longtime servant. Nordier had called a meeting, and, seeing the lawyers in the antechamber, his son knew exactly what this was about. He was being disinherited. Well, Valentine was being disinherited. Villefort looked on the man who had once held his life in his hands. During the 100 days, when Napoleon had returned from exile, Nordier had shielded his son from reprisals. Villefort took out his handkerchief and wiped the drool from his father's mouth. Saying that he didn't care what the old man did, Valentine was marrying Franz. Furthermore, Villefort knew. Silently, Nordier narrowed his eyes. Villefort said he knew what happened that first night that he came to Paris, all those years ago, to warn the king about Napoleon. Franz's father had infiltrated the Jacobin clubs, and he was spying on them. Then, he disappeared. Nordier had killed him, and now his granddaughter would take his name, and even if he disinherited her, there was nothing he could do about it. Villefort opened the door and waved everyone in. The telegraph operator pulled turnips from the ground and waved to the man coming up the path. The visitor was unusually dressed. A rich guy. A count. What was that? Oh, the visitor wanted a tour of the telegraph post. The operator pulled out his pocket watch and shrugged. Sure, it was almost time for the afternoon report from Spain anyway. Monte Cristo sat, feigning amazement at the telegraph. But the operator explained that it was all very boring. This one went to the government, and a lot of times he didn't even know what he was signaling. He just repeated it. Monte Cristo casually asked the man how much he made in a year. Oh, that little, huh? And his pension? The man was 55, right? The telegraph operator nodded. You know, what was the fine if he missed a message? Or, even worse, relayed the wrong message to Paris? The telegraph operator said that it was 1/10 of his monthly income. Just then, the incoming wire signaled that the message was ready. The operator turned to reply, but Monte Cristo put his hand on the incoming wire. The operator liked to garden, yes? How would he like 2 acres, as opposed to a mouse-infested plot in the shadow of a shack? The operator looked on the incoming wire. The message was incoming. Are you trying to bribe me? He asked. Monte Cristo said that the operator was very smart. That's exactly what he was trying to do. Here, Monte Cristo counted out 15 times the man's annual income and shoved the banknotes into the operator's pocket. He only wanted to play a harmless prank on a friend and, oops, looks like the operator missed the evening's telegraph. Guess now he needed the money more than ever. The operator took out the money and counted it. Monte Cristo sighed. This needed to happen now. He told the operator that he was going to do something very special for the man. He was going to give him 10 more years of his salary, making it 25 years total. Half of that would buy him a villa with a 2-acre garden, and the other half, if invested properly, would gift him his yearly salary as a telegraph operator until he died. He'd never have to work again. Monte Cristo plopped down another stack of banknotes and a piece of paper with a few marks on it. The operator just had to send that message along to Paris. Enjoy your new garden and your new life, Monte Cristo said, bowing as the man tapped out the message, took the stack of banknotes, and already started packing up his things. Back in Paris, Lucien Debray skidded from his office and ran as fast as he could down the hall. He leapt into the first carriage he found and promised the driver double his fare if he made it to the house of Baron Danglars as fast as he could. Upon arrival, the servants, who were used to looking the other way, let him in, and he made his way not to the Baron's wing of the house, the Baron was out, but the Baroness, Madame Danglars. She kissed him and said that this was a nice surprise, but he pushed her away. Did they have any Spanish bonds? She shrugged. Of course, like 6 million. Why? He shook his head. They needed to sell them all. Tonight, word had come in over the telegraph. There was a revolution in Spain. We're going to go to Monte Cristo's dinner party, but that will be right after this. School's back in session, and HelloFresh is here to take the guesswork out of meals week after week. That's right. Amid after-school chaos, HelloFresh's meal kits make it easy to handle dinner and have family meals ready in 30 minutes. It's simple to use with easy-to-follow instructions and pre-measured ingredients, all perfect for hectic school nights when your to-do list is long or you're busy chauffeuring kids all over. There's even a one-pot recipe in the menu each week for those extra busy weeknights. Seriously, one pot means cleaning up one pot. It's amazing. Like the one-pan mushroom ravioli gratin we did last week. Warm and creamy on the inside, crispy Parmesan crust on the outside. Homemade too, but way easier than takeout. HelloFresh is easy to receive, simple to cook, and the ideal dinner help we need. For a total of $60 off, that's $20 off your first 3 boxes, visit hellofresh.com/fictional60 and enter code fictional60. That's fictional60. It's like receiving 6 meals free when you go to hellofresh.com/fictional60 and enter code fictional60. So summertimes with kids can be kind of challenging, but we found something to help. And we're bringing one of our favorite summer finds into the fall season, KiwiCo. It's great all year, but we personally found it nice for keeping our son's mind and hands busy these past few months. KiwiCo creates super cool, hands-on projects for kids that make learning about STEAM fun. That's science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. And no, I didn't know what that meant before KiwiCo. All KiwiCo projects are created by an in-house team of product designers and rigorously tested by kids. And with 6 types of projects for kids of all ages, from the Cricut Crate for toddlers to the Doodle Crate for teens, KiwiCo inspires kids to see themselves as makers, engineering and creating their own innovative designs and outcomes. And it's really cool to watch the learning take place. We recently built a pinball machine. Yeah, I know. We designed the board, launched, and actually played, all while discovering physics. Everything we needed came in the box. Materials, illustrated directions, plus a bonus Play and Learn magazine with extra activities. Our son loved it. Here's the awesome news. KiwiCo is offering fictional listeners the chance to try them for free. To redeem this offer and learn more about their projects for kids, visit kiwico.com/fictional. All right, now back to the show. Bertuccio, Monte Cristo's steward, looked down on the table from the kitchen. There were more people showing up than were on the guest list. And Monte Cristo had warned him of 2 more, added at the last minute. Major Cavalcanti and his son, Andrea. 2 rich Italian noblemen looking to buy land or bring their business to Paris or blah, blah, blah. Baron this, Count that. All the names started to run together. They were a lot easier to forget than faces. And then Bertuccio saw 2 faces he wouldn't ever forget. One was Villefort, the man Bertuccio had once stabbed, but not managed to kill. He just arrived alongside his wife. Bertuccio knew that would be a shock, seeing him again. His encounter with Villefort had been such a pivotal moment, and yet he never expected to see her. It was the woman. It was the same woman from that defining night who Bertuccio had seen pacing the window as he scouted for Villefort. "Tell me," Monte Cristo said. Bertuccio jumped. His boss always seemed to materialize behind him. But Monte Cristo was far too perceptive to try and deceive. Bertuccio murmured that woman, the mother of the child, Benedetto's mother, she was also there that night. From the kitchen, he pointed to the woman just arriving with a dashing Lucien Debray, Madame Danglars, Baron Danglars' wife. Monte Cristo asked if he was certain, and Bertuccio nodded. "Good. Do you see any other faces you recognize?" Bertuccio looked down the table. The Villeforts and the Danglars, a man by the name of Maximilian Morel making eyes at Valentine Villefort, Lucien Debray, some old man named Major Cavalcanti, and Bertuccio reached for a knife. But Monte Cristo, his grip like iron, grabbed his wrist and shook his head. There was a plan. The knife clanged down on the table. Bertuccio couldn't understand. He didn't know why Benedetto, his adopted son, was here, much less why he was calling himself Baron Andrea Cavalcanti. "There is a plan," Monte Cristo repeated, reassuring Bertuccio once again. "Now, go and announce dinner and head home." Bertuccio turned. He had tried to murder one man in the room and had raised another. How would they not recognize him? Monte Cristo laughed. Trust him. They wouldn't recognize him. Dinner was good. Amazing, actually. And after that, Monte Cristo insisted on taking all guests on a tour. The house had been completely redone, save for 2 areas. It actually used to belong to the Marquis de Saint-Méran, Villefort's father-in-law from his first marriage. so nearly everyone had been there over the years. Only 2 of them had seen the bedroom. That was one of the areas that hadn't been changed. Villefort and Madame Danglars became more and more agitated as Monte Cristo described why he hadn't redone this room. It was oppressively drab, suffocating even. Monte Cristo stood before the group. The feeling you got from a place, it told a story. The story of this room, it wasn't a nice one. Monte Cristo had felt it when he walked in, and it had been confirmed days later. A crime had happened in this room. Monte Cristo pointed toward the bed, whose linens had been washed but not updated. He said it started there, and then moved downward. He pointed to a hidden stairwell that ran down to the garden. Monte Cristo took everyone down there, and then stood over the spot, and announced that, mere days ago, one of his men had found something in the dirt. A box, a casket. They opened it, and they found the bones of an infant child. The crowd gasped, Villefort shook, and Madame Danglars fainted. Madame de Villefort was on it, with Monte Cristo's red potion, using 1 drop to bring Madame Danglars back to consciousness. Villefort begged people to back up and give her room. Helping her to her feet, she heard "My office, tomorrow," before Monte Cristo arrived, apologizing for upsetting her delicate sensibilities with such a terrible story, and pleading with Villefort to open up a case to discover whose child this could be and why they might kill it. Infanticide was punishable by beheading, after all. Later that night, while Andrea Cavalcanti, that is, the disguised Benedetto, waited for his carriage after the dinner, he thought he saw something in the trees. When that something brushed right past his valet and took the seat across from him in the carriage, he was sure of it. "How did you get here?" Benedetto demanded. The stranger shrugged. Same as Benedetto. He was the one who filed down the chains. "Well, what do you want?" Benedetto growled. The stranger said he wanted what Benedetto, his old cellmate, wanted. To live a new life, and become a new person. It shouldn't be too difficult. Benedetto had done it with very little trouble. Benedetto told his valet to get moving, and whispered that it was because he had a wealthy benefactor. The stranger shrugged. Well, now, so did he. He didn't need much. Just 200 a week in perpetuity, so that he could set himself up as a retired baker. He shook his belly. He already looked the part. In return, he wouldn't tell Monte Cristo, Major Cavalcanti, or anyone else Benedetto's real name and his real past. Benedetto was smart enough to know when to take the deal. He extended his hand and told the man to come by on Mondays to collect his money. He commanded his valet to stop on the outskirts of Paris. Their guest was leaving here. A smile seemed to glow in the moonlight as Catarossa, the stranger from the cab, shouted back a "thank you." And then, just before he turned and whistled, he added, "See you Monday." What was his cut? Danglars asked, after he burst into Madame Danglars' wing of the mansion and found Lucien Debray there. They had just come home from Monte Cristo's dinner party, and his wife had gone straight to her quarters with her young friend. Madame Danglars said it was late. Her husband should go to bed. They'd talk about this in the morning, but Danglars insisted. It would be Lucien who was going. Lucien made to say something, but Danglars turned away, barking a "Bye, Lucien," without even looking. Madame Danglars gave her lover a nod, and the man left the room quietly and as quickly as he could. "You have a lot of hobbies, you know that?" Danglars started. "First, you want to learn piano. So you have this young, attractive piano teacher over at all hours of the day for intensive study. Then, you wanted to learn how to swim. So you met your young, attractive swimming teacher at all hours of the day. Now, you're learning diplomacy. So useful. So that's why you've been having Monsieur Debray over. A young, attractive royal minister. So I'll ask again, what is his cut?" Madame Danglars scoffed. It was beneath a lady to discuss money. Danglars sneered. "Oh, a lady." Now there was a generous term. She didn't want to discuss it, but she liked managing it. And you know what? Danglars didn't care. He didn't. By knowing things hours before everyone else, they'd been able to make a lot of money. But they had lost a lot of money the other night, didn't they? 2 million, right? Gone in a night. Madame Danglars claimed it was the telegraph operator. The man was fired, and he would have had charges brought up against him if he hadn't fled to who knows where. Danglars asked his wife if he knew how their business worked. She effectively managed it, so she should know. They had a principal investment. It was like their skin. He was known as having millions upon millions, but he had a principal that sometimes gained money and sometimes lost money. Sometimes he had wealthy borrowers that he loaned out to. Those were safer bets, because he always made his money back with interest. It put him in a bit of a tight spot, though, because with someone, say this Monte Cristo fellow who asked for $6 million up front, it took away his buffer. And now he was down to his principal. The Spanish thing? They were bleeding right now. It would stop, but he didn't get this far to lose it all because his bored wife was sleeping with someone in the government and fancied herself a banker. Danglars paused as he walked toward the door, and then he turned back. You know, for years, I wonder why your last husband just killed himself when he found out about you and Villefort. And no, don't act surprised. I knew that when I married you. I know everything. But I wondered, why did he kill himself and not you and Villefort? But then I figured it out. He had nothing. You were his everything, and you crushed him. That's not the case with me. I have my money. Remember that. The next day, that same Madame Danglars met with Villefort in his office. He knows, Villefort announced. She agreed that Monte Cristo obviously knew about the baby, but he didn't know it was them. No, Villefort insisted. He knows. She probably didn't remember that night, Villefort said. She only knew the baby hadn't taken his first breath. They believed he was dead, and after Madame Danglars fainted, he had taken the boy down to the garden to bury him. Villefort was attacked, and just before he lost consciousness, the man said something about his treasure. When he awoke, it was days later, and he was on the coast. His staff had concocted the story about him being in a duel. It took him a month in bed until he was able to sit up, and 3 months until he was able to leave the hospital. When he returned to Paris, he learned that she had married Danglars. They had told her what happened to the baby, but Villefort never told her that he had gone back. He had gone back to the house, to the garden. He had dug it up, all of it, and he found nothing. No box, no infant skeleton, no trace of what had happened. Monte Cristo had lied about finding the box, and yet he had known exactly where it had been buried. After that, Villefort had asked around and discovered that the baby had been dropped off at an orphanage at the edge of town, in a box that matched his own, but the child was adopted, and he was only able to follow the trail south for so long until facts became rumors. That was nearly 20 years ago. He wished he had enough money to pay 1 million men for 1 million secrets and find his among them, but the trail had gone cold. Still, Monte Cristo knew something, and he had wanted Villefort to know that he knew. The king's attorney had been caught flat-footed. He needed to know everything about this Monte Cristo guy, and luckily, he had a team of people whose job it was to do just that. Days later, across town, Monte Cristo was meeting with his banker, Baron Danglars. In the past few days, Baron Danglars had met a number of setbacks. There was the Spanish fiasco, but even beyond that, he had received a number of bad tips from various nobility. That, and things had soured between Lucien and his wife, which took away Danglars' edge. What was a cut was now a hemorrhage, and it was made all the worse by Monte Cristo withdrawing more money against his note for unlimited credit. Danglars nearly shuddered as he parted with another $500,000. Monte Cristo didn't seem to notice and continued making conversation. He had seen Danglars chatting with Andrea Cavalcanti at his dinner. That boy, he probably didn't even know it yet, but he was likely richer than both of them. The Cavalcantis were old money. Monte Cristo laughed. And he was in Paris looking for a wife, too. Too bad Danglars' daughter was already betrothed to Albert, the son of Mercedes and the Count de Morcerf. Danglars nodded slowly. Yeah, too bad. Monte Cristo didn't think the Morcerfs would yield to a Cavalcanti, Danglars laughed. The Morcerfs? The Count looked confused. What was it? It was just... Wait, really? The Count didn't know? Monte Cristo shook his head. Know what? Danglars grinned. He had known the Count de Morcerf for a long time, but it hadn't always been as the Count de Morcerf. It wasn't a family title or holding. In truth, he was born a poor fisherman by the name of Fernand Mondego. The Baron Danglars had been made a baron, but Fernand had bought his title. Monte Cristo sat back. But how did a poor fisherman get conscripted into the army and then leave a multimillionaire with a title? Danglars threw up his hands. He had no idea. There were rumors about something that had happened in Greece, but that's all he knew. Monte Cristo counted out his money and put it in the bag he kept at his side. He thanked Danglars for his business and gave him a little bit of free advice. If his daughter was marrying a man, he would want to know everything possible about that family. Danglars must have contacts in Greece. It shouldn't be too hard to learn the truth. Villefort's investigation was a complete success, if the point of it was to give people something to gossip about. He had sent his best investigators, quietly, to talk with Father Busoni, an Italian priest, and Lord Wilmore, an English lord, both of whom knew the Count. The investigators insisted on complete confidentiality, but Monte Cristo being the talk of Paris, they couldn't hold the information to themselves. They told a couple of people, telling them to not tell anyone, and so, naturally, by the time of the Morcerf's ball, that is, Fernand and Mercedes' ball, at the end of the week, it was all anyone was talking about. The priest said Monte Cristo's real name was Zaccone, and he was the son of a wealthy Maltese shipbuilder, and had bought his title when he purchased the island of Monte Cristo itself. He wasn't as rich as everyone believed, his wealth only totaling about $4 million. Of course, Lord Wilmore, Monte Cristo's sworn enemy after Monte Cristo had slept with the wife of one of his friends back in England, claimed that Monte Cristo was, in fact, extremely rich, richer than anyone else in Paris. He had, apparently, fought against the British in India, and that's the first time he and Wilmore fought. What Villefort didn't realize was that he'd learned nothing to indicate why Monte Cristo was coming after him, because the only people he interviewed were Monte Cristo's alter egos. It was at that party, that ball thrown by the Morcerfs, that someone asked where Monte Cristo was, and others answered that he had disappeared into the garden with Madame de Morcerf, Mercedes. Madame, I never eat muscatel grapes, Monte Cristo said, again, to Mercedes. She lowered her hand, and the grapes bounced to the ground. The music from the party emanated from the pavilion, but they weren't on the pavilion. They were in the garden, where Mercedes was trying to get Monte Cristo to eat something. When he set down the peach as well, she finally asked him, in certain Middle Eastern countries, wasn't there a tradition where, if people ate together in the same house, they would be eternal friends? Monte Cristo smiled. Yes, that was a tradition, but they were in France. Eternal friendships were more difficult to come by. Mercedes, the Countess de Morcerf, probed more deeply. There were rumors about him, rumors that he had traveled, and that he had suffered. She wanted to know, was he happy now? Monte Cristo thanked her for caring, but said he didn't see any reason why people should think he was unhappy. After all, he didn't complain. Mercedes spoke again, this time asking if he was married, in love. He had been seen at the opera with a beautiful young Greek woman. Without meeting Mercedes' eyes, Monte Cristo said that she was a slave, a princess, but a slave he had bought in Constantinople, and he looked on her as a daughter, nothing more. He had been in love once, but no longer. She cast her eyes down to some nearby flowers. What had happened? Monte Cristo swallowed hard. He had been in love a long time ago. He was even set to be married, too. But then they were separated. When he returned, he found she had married someone else. Maybe his heart was weaker than the hearts of most men. But he'd felt that one, even when he had been through so much that he didn't think he could feel anything anymore. He had felt that one deeply. Monte Cristo remained facing away from her, and now turned around with a smile. That wasn't a good story, though. Every man over the age of 20 had a tale or two of heartbreak. "Did you forgive her?" Mercedes managed. "Her? Yes. Always," Monte Cristo replied. "And what of the ones that separated you?" Mercedes managed. But Monte Cristo didn't get a chance to answer. Albert came running. Monsieur de Villefort was here. Within 3 days of the Morcerf's ball, the Villeforts had supplanted Monte Cristo as the talk of Paris. Villefort's daughter, Valentine, was set to marry Franz, and it was well known that she wasn't thrilled about the union. But it was still moving forward, even when the Marquis de Saint-Méran, Valentine's grandparents, and Villefort's in-laws from his first marriage, suddenly died, leading to Villefort showing up at the ball bearing bad news. Shortly thereafter, Valentine's grandmother went as well. Since Valentine was their only heir, it now truly didn't matter that Nordier was disinheriting her. It was only at the last second that Nordier revealed the one thing that could call off the marriage. Buried under the false bottom of a desk drawer, Nordier's servant produced a signed declaration, signed by Nordier's friends, nearly 26 years ago, saying that Nordier had killed Franz's father in a duel. Franz didn't know if it was from a lawful duel, or if Nordier had just assassinated the spy on the night of Napoleon's return from exile and had his friends fill out this paper, but it didn't matter. Nordier had killed Franz's father, and now Franz refused to marry his granddaughter. The wedding was off. Wow. These people will tear themselves apart just for fun. Literally none of that was me, Monte Cristo muttered to no one in particular, while Madame Danglars, who had been explaining the whole thing, called for tea. Monte Cristo and Albert dropped in on the Danglars. Monte Cristo to withdraw more money, while Albert was curious about his betrothed. He met with a cold reception from Danglars, who, after finishing his business with Monte Cristo, said only two things. One, his daughter, Eugenie, was unavailable. She was in her room with her piano teacher, Louisa, and Andrea Cavalcanti. And two, directed straight at Monte Cristo, his mail had come in. Albert didn't like Eugenie Danglars, but this was an insult. To allow another man into the bedroom of his betrothed, someplace he hadn't even been, it didn't matter that he'd been looking for an out to this engagement since it was announced. He wouldn't put up with this. Monte Cristo's hand on his shoulder stayed him, and they watched Danglars leave. At last, Monte Cristo said they should go. Albert had been wanting to meet his slave, Haydée, right? Well, he should come learn her story. They came when Haydée was only 5, sent by Napoleon during the 100 Days to aid Ali Pasha, a Greek king, against the Turks. She still remembered the night when her mother pulled her from her bed with screams, and together they ran to the caves. He had come to them, the French soldier that had risen in the ranks. He shouted, in the name of the emperor, that it was safe. Haydée and her mother stayed behind, and had watched the French soldier surprise the king and force him to his knees. It really wasn't anything personal. He had opened up the city, and they had made him a millionaire. Right now, the Turks were flooding into Yanina, his city. It was over. Now, all they wanted was the king's head. The French soldier gave the word, and the Turkish soldiers stepped forward, blasting the king full of holes. Haydée and her mother had been on the other side of the wall, and the queen, screaming through tears and spit, ran to go die with her husband. But she wasn't so lucky. It was just icing on the cake when the French soldier discovered them, and he sold them into slavery. A queen and a princess went for a high price. That was the last time Haydée saw her mother. The last time she saw her father was while she was being dragged from the city with the slavers. She had looked up, and she saw his head on a pike. For a few years, she was the prize of a sultan, until a stranger made him an offer he couldn't refuse. A pack of pills we mentioned last episode. In a case made from a hollowed-out emerald, Haydée explained that it was on that day, 7 years ago, that she became the property of Monte Cristo. It was on that day that she was freed. Albert sat stunned. He asked if she remembered the name of the French soldier that had betrayed her father. Haydée looked at Monte Cristo, and then back to Albert. No, she didn't. But if she remembered, she would tell him. She would tell everyone. That would be unnecessary, though, because the next day, in one of the more prominent papers in Paris, someone published an anonymous article shedding more light on the betrayal of Ali Pasha that had happened nearly 20 years prior. It didn't give a last name, only a first name. He was betrayed by a French soldier sent there by Napoleon, a man by the name of Fernand. That's it for this time. Next week, we will finish up the Count of Monte Cristo, and we'll see the end of Edmond Dantes' decades-long plan for revenge. So I should also say that the famous Muscatel grapes line reveals a mistake from last week. I said Monte Cristo was eaten in the house of Fernand Mondego when he met Albert the first time, but it must have slipped by me that he's in what appears to be like a guest house on their property that belongs to Albert, because he's very careful to not eat under Fernand's roof. You might know this from our other podcast, Myths and Legends, or most famously from Game of Thrones in recent years, but in the ancient and medieval world, they took hospitality very seriously. Guests did not harm hosts, and hosts didn't harm guests. If you shared someone's food under their roof, you were a guest. Monte Cristo is very careful not to eat any of Mondego's food, because he's sticking to an ancient custom. And, well, Mondego is not a friend. We'll see what he does next week. This week's episode was, of course, adapted from The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. It was written by me, Jason Weiser, and edited by Carissa Weiser. Our theme song is by Breakmaster Cylinder, and there are links to even more music in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.